Good morning and welcome to Yad Malky a Mask workshop on assisting the struggling child at home and in the classroom. This morning we have with us world-famous Richard Lavoie, and we are very, very honored to have Rabbi Ephraim E. Shapiro, the Rav of Congregation Shaaray, Tefilah, North Miami Beach, who will be offering words of chizuk. I would like to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for giving me the ability and opportunities to help families around the world, and to my parents, Yehuda Leib, Ben Reb Mordechai, Olav Shalom, and Ita Bas Reb Shlomo, Aleha Hashalom, for teaching me the true meaning of chesed and setting the bar so high. This morning's workshop is in memory of Malka Bas Avraham Shalom. May her neshama have an aliyah. We will open by verse showing a short film presentation by the Yad Malky Legacy titled, "If Only You Cared When I Was Fragile and Scared." Thereafter, we ask for Mr. Ephraim E. to please come up and address the audience. Thank you.
This is a story about me, Malky, of blessed memory. I was always pure, with a learning disability. Scholastic success came with much difficulty. I had so many talents, unique to me. Judging only by academics, I was marked a C. My pure heart always wanted to share with humanity. A kind word, a smile, filled with sensitivity. To make people feel special and treated with dignity. That was the person I wanted to be. I had struggled so many years alone, silently. Most people didn't know my challenges constantly. To keep up with my class, I struggled daily. Never giving up, I advanced incredibly. I knew I'm not the best scholastically. But does that negate my creativity? Does that mean I'm worthless, without quality? Should that ruin my dreams for all eternity? Are academics the most integral part of being a wife? Is that how most people get through life? Do good grades help in times of strife? These feelings pierced my heart like a knife. I was still fragile, working to keep the pieces together. My 8th grade teacher believed in me forever. I was determined not to let her down altogether, and promised to do my best and even better. Oh, but my teachers didn't know. I always tried my best, even when I didn't get 100 on every test. My disabilities separated me from all the rest. I simply couldn't fulfill every request. Failure made me feel like I wasn't good enough. At least not yet. Little did I know, Hashem had limited my skill set. Effort didn't count. Teachers' goals I had not met, but I did my best. There's not one shred of regret. Time for high school. I was hoping to do well and break my previously haunting spell. I tried so hard, but soon my heart fell. When I was expelled from school with no good reason to tell, I was so embarrassed. I'd hide home all day long, wearing my school uniform without feeling that I belong. Do I deserve this humiliation? Had I done something wrong? I begged and pleaded, but the school's rejection was very strong. When after 3 months, one school had pity on me, from my prison, I was finally set free. I was determined to prove I'll get my degree and finally find my place in humanity. My parents got me all the help I needed to achieve. In me, they always did believe. After a long day in school, not really grasping, I sat all evening with tutors to help me with understanding. It was like going to 2 schools in 1 year. Finally, I buckled. It was too much to bear. The subjects that were so simple for the rest of my grade took me hours to complete with enormous amount of aid. Although I was doing well, I still felt dejected. I stopped caring, and my grades I neglected. If this is the only way not to be rejected, this is not the life choice I had elected. I passed the point of fragile. Now I was broken, beyond repair. Like the plate of the Tanayim, they break on a chair. I started feeling and thinking, life isn't fair. How could it be? Where do I go from here? Without many details, for years I went on searching for a place where I'm appreciated. My soul was yearning. It may be something other than learning, but at least I'll have a reason to get up every morning. I was so scared to try new things, for fear that I'd fail. My confidence was shattered. Belief in myself, very frail. The special talents I had remained suppressed. Failure was an area I didn't want to invest. The love my parents gave me was unconditional and true. How I appreciated their acceptance, I made sure they really knew. It gave me the determination to want to heal and live a productive life, one that is real. The struggles I went through may seem to you as negligent, but I assure you, the way it looked, that's not what it meant. For when one is in such pain, in a constant descent, escaping those feelings is life's rent. The amount of times I fell and stood up tall, that's because my parents I could always call. I was young,
but not strong enough to walk without a fall.
When I felt my future blocked by a big wall, I had my special connection with Hashem. I knew He was there. Even when I didn't understand, my life very unclear, my parents knew I felt Hashem near. That I was a thinker, you may not be aware. Don't judge a book by its cover. We simply need to understand one another. Show respect and value for who they really are. Even you need recognition to shine your own star. The story I'm telling is not just my own. So many children in this pit are thrown. The dark abyss is what they see as their own. Shame, degradation, and rejection is why they moan. In honor of my neshama, please make a change and stop judging all within range. Try to feel another person's pain. Think what they're going through. Don't look at the surface, how it looks to you. We aren't all gifted with the same talents, and we don't all share the same set of parents. But to Hashem, we're too precious to miss. To each of us, He gives a unique life purpose. Am Yisrael is a nation that should be a unit of one, sharing the burden of suffering, second to none. The willingness to help and support is readily there if we only stop for a moment to observe, to listen, and to hear. In tragedy, we see Am Yisrael, how they get together. As a team, any storm they will weather. Realize these children too aren't looking to cause anyone pain. Understand us as a tragedy, simple and plain. Don't criticize their parents and say it's their fault. Their reward for suffering is locked in a special vault. Let's care about each other's problems as if it's our own. Then the real V'ahavta Kamocha will be shown. If only you cared when I was fragile and scared, I wouldn't be broken. These words would be unspoken.
Unlike the common practice to start a talk with an anecdote, instead I've chosen a nursery rhyme most of you are familiar with. It goes as follows. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. At one point in our life, this was just a silly nursery rhyme. Little did we know that one day this little silly rhyme will manifest itself into having some real deep meaning. Roughly 9 years ago, through very challenging circumstances, my wife and I were privileged to meet this most amazing, passionate, and powerhouse of a woman, Mrs. Ruchama Klapman, of a truly life-changing organization called Mask. Attempting to genuinely describe her in detail, even miktsas shavacho, within a limited amount of time, would quite frankly be a disservice to her and to Mask. And if we do allot the right amount of time, you won't be going home today, and we'll have to reschedule the rest of the event and the presenters for another time. Thus, we'll just skip, albeit this very important part, and go on with the event as scheduled. However, not before we give Mrs. Ruchama Klapman and Mask a big round of applause. Many of you have listened to the radio interview with me from 2 years ago and heard some of the details of Mrs. Klapman's interaction with us at that time, relentlessly trying to help and save the life of our beloved daughter, Malky Legacy Mask. Hence, there's no need to repeat it here and now. However, it's important to at least give a public thank you so much to Mrs. Ruchama Klapman for all your efforts and emotional support at that time. And thanks for the offer to have Yad Malky Legacy partner with Mask in this very important, life-altering and life-saving seminar. Why did we choose to take part in this particular seminar? At that time, roughly 9 years ago, when our Malky Legacy Mask was quote-unquote diagnosed with a quote-unquote learning disability, one of our sources we were also introduced to for learning and understanding about this issue was Mr. Richard Lavoie. Malky was smart, bright, intelligent, and deeply analytical. Yet she absorbed textbook material differently than some other students. As one of her great teachers in 8th grade, a real professional, told us, I was perplexed as to why Malky hands in her test blank with no responses, when I knew she put in the effort and that she knew the answers, rather than the quick labeling as rebellious, fresh, or misbehaved. She was intent to get to the root cause quickly and concluded that Malky froze out of fear of failing. So she decided on a simple solution, to hand Malky a blank paper and ask her the queries orally, the results of which was that Malky scored hundreds. Listening and watching to Rick's workshops, seminars, presentations provided a wealth of information and immense insight and understanding. We came to realize that mainstream children, which learn differently than others, or rather differently than the prepackaged teaching methods in schools, can indeed not only survive, but thrive to great success, if only the proper knowledge is required and applied timely. Malky was 14 at the time. As parents, we frantically endeavored to do whatever we can to help Malky. We sought the help, as the nursery rhyme says, from all the king's horses and all the king's men, but to realize that through her years of struggle and pain, as the nursery rhyme says, Malky already had a great fall. Her delicate nefesh, her emotional being, was shattered beyond repair, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put her together again. This generated a bunch of what-ifs. What if only we knew this then, and what if only we knew that then? We could have done this, and we could have done that. Consequently, we came to realize there indeed are ounces of prevention in existence whose value is far greater than the pounds of cure, and the path to tragedy can indeed be averted. Thus, we embarked on a mission to form the Yad Malky Legacy, to search out and bring to the community as many of these life-saving resources as possible. So without further ado, it's our honor to introduce to you today the world-renowned Mr. Richard Lavoie. Many refer to him as the teacher's teacher, to share with us insights, ideas, methods, and skills based on his decades of experience in reaching and teaching each and every child, including those that learn differently than the students next to them. Welcome, Mr. Lavoie.
Thank you, my friend. I've been doing this a long time. I've been on the road for 40 years. I've spoken in every state in the United States at least 5 times. I've done speaking tours through Australia and Hong Kong and New Zealand and throughout Europe, and heading for Israel in a couple of months. But I've never been as anxious about a presentation as I am today. I made a big mistake after I signed on to do this. I made a big mistake of watching this video and watching the interview that my new friend Abe did on the radio a while ago. And it made me realize that this was an extraordinarily special organization, extraordinarily special purpose for being here. And I've been doing this for so long now that I train young people who want to be speakers. I train them how to do it. And one of the things I always say is never begin with an apology. Never, gee, my plane was late, they lost my luggage. Nobody cares about that. Don't begin with an apology, as many speakers do. But I'm going to break my own rule. I'm going to ask you to be patient with me. Because frankly, after I watched that video and had an opportunity to talk to Abe on the phone and listen to that interview, I dug deeply into the presentation I was going to present, kind of tore it apart and put together one that I thought would be appropriate for the day. So this is a workshop I have never done before. So be So be patient and understanding with me, if you will. Hats off to the organization Mask. What a great name. Bringing parents together to do this kind of thing. And I know it used to be mothers, and then someone penciled in fathers. But come on, really? I mean, really? It's the moms. It's the mothers again. I was reminded when I saw that you had added the name father. This is absolutely true. My wife and I were sitting on the beach in Hawaii. It's funny, when I'm speaking in North Dakota or South Dakota or Wyoming, my wife's not able to join me. But when I do speak in Hawaii, she was able to free herself up. And we were sitting on the beach, and there was me and my wife, and there were several other women, and somebody pointed out so I was the only gentleman there, and somebody pointed out in the water, and there were 2 big adult whales and a small baby whale frolicking out in the water, right 100 yards off the shore. You could see them beautifully. And the 2 big adult whales were swimming around and pushing the little baby, and the baby would jump over them. And it was really amazing to watch. And they were all frolicking together. And then suddenly we realized the 2 adults were frolicking together, but the baby had wandered off and was coming toward the shore, dangerously toward the shore, and would have gotten beached. And the 2 adults are still playing. Suddenly, one of the adults realizes it and races toward the baby whale and pushes the baby whale out to safety. And one of the women said, oh, isn't that amazing? The mother whale just saved the baby. And I said, well, how did you know it was the mother? And she looked at me. It was the mother. It was the mother. The guy is still out there frolicking in the water. Again, I'm really delighted to be here. And somebody said when I was in back there, they said, are you going to teach us how to make our jobs easier? And I'm afraid I've got some bad news. Can we have the presentation? Thank you. I'm afraid I've got some bad news for you because I changed the title of the presentation to Struggles to Things That Don't Work and Things That Do to I'm not telling you it's going to be easy. I'm telling you it's going to be worth it. I'm not here to save you any time. To teach the way I'm going to propose you teach is more likely to catch a Malky. You're more likely to discover that child who has hidden talents. But it's not easy. I don't come to you telling you I'm going to make your job easy, because I'm not. I'm going to make it more difficult. And it's going to be my day is going to be based on this belief that I came to a long time ago. I was up on a plane one time, and I'd realized I'd been in the field for 25 years. That was a number of years ago now, but for 25 years I had been in the field of education. And I realized that I got thinking about it, the kind of a landmark, and I thought to myself, and if you've been teaching for a long time, I suggest you do this. I said, I'm going to sit down and make a list of the 25 best people I've ever worked with, the 25 of my mentors, the 25 people that I think really made a change in the way I teach and work with kids, the 25 best, most effective people I've ever seen dealing with struggling kids. And then I'm going to write each of them a letter. And I'm going to say, you probably don't even remember me, but I worked with you in 1972, and I watched you and learned much from you. I'm going to write each one of them a letter. And then I'm going to analyze the list. I'm going to take a look at the list and say, what do these 25 people have in common? What is it that these 25 people do that makes them the best educators I've ever seen? And then I figured I could take that analysis and use it to help teachers who were struggling in the classroom. It makes sense. It really does. So I made the list of 25, and it was a really neat thing to do. I really enjoyed it, brought back some great memories. I made the list of my 25 all-stars. I never wrote the letters. I really should do that, but I haven't done that yet. But I analyzed the list, and I was so disappointed, because these 25 superstars, these 25 my heroes in education, the 25 of them had nothing in common. Some were men, some were women. Some were old, some were young, some had great training, some had no training. One of them was a school bus driver. But then I thought about it and I realized the things what these 25 people had in common is simply these three things. They had knowledge in the field. Special education is not just an art, it's also a science. You've got to have knowledge about why the kids look at the world the way that they do. They have knowledge in the field. They know techniques, and they have a philosophy. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide today up into three chunks. We're going to spend some time increasing your knowledge in the field. Then we're going to talk about some techniques and strategies, and woven through that is going to be philosophy. So we've got a great deal to do, and let's get started. What am I doing here? What am I doing here? My heritage, my upbringing, my faith is totally different from yours. And I want to be very candid with you, and this is absolutely the truth. I was interviewed by one of the colleges, was paying a tribute to me, one of the colleges where I previously worked. And they sent a young graduate student to me to ask me some questions to do an interview for the material that we're going to pass out. And he said, Rick, what are the three things you're most proud of? You've been in the field for 50 years. You've made some changes in the field. You made a difference in the field. What are the three things that you've accomplished that have happened to you that make you the most proud? And I said, well, I'll name the three things, but they're in no particular order. But let me name the three things. I said, first of all, are my books. I mean, if you've written a book, it's really kind of like giving birth. You know, it's a very different, not so much, but it's a real process, and I'm proud of my books. I'm proud of the fact that I spent 30 years running residential schools, literally where the kids live there, waking them up in the morning and putting them to bed at night, 24/7, 365 for 30 years. I'm proud of that. But very frankly, I told him, the thing I am most proud of is here in the twilight of my career, that my work has been embraced by the Orthodox Jewish community. I just didn't see it coming. It's been so meaningful. I looked at my calendar coming in. 2/3 of the presentations I give next year in 2020 are going to be to Jewish educational organizations. And I'm a Roman Catholic from Boston. How did this happen? How did this happen? It's been the great, great voyage of my career. And I hope you don't think I'm being patronizing. I tell all audiences that. Well, how did it start? It was about 10 years ago now. I was asked to give a presentation at the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. And if you've never been to the Museum of Tolerance, if you're within 1,000 miles of it, go to see it. It's life-changing. It's an absolutely amazing place. And the gentleman who was sponsoring it was a friend of mine. And he called me and he said, Rick, we have 50 people coming to your presentation. I said, oh, that's terrific. That's great. And he called me a little later and he said, Rick, we have 100 people coming to the presentation. I said, oh, that's terrific. Thanks for letting me know. They called, Rick, we have 200 people coming to the presentation. And I said, that's swell, and, good, that's terrific. One day, finally called me and said, Rick, we have 400 people coming to the presentation. I said, I appreciate your updates, but frankly, I've spoken to 5,000 people. The numbers don't bother me. 400 people, that's great. That's terrific. He said, no, you don't understand. 400 rabbis. Ooh. Do you know what it's like to be in a room with 400 people and you're the dumbest person in the room? Do you know what that's like? And it's been, that started the journey. And in this journey, what I say every time I speak to a Jewish organization, I will make mistakes. One of my rabbi friends said, you're a friend. You can make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. I will make mistakes. I will say the wrong thing. I don't mean in any way to offend in any way. But this isn't the way I grew up. This isn't my heritage. It isn't my life. And I did make mistakes. One of the first times I spoke to a Jewish organization, it was in a temple, in a synagogue. And it was back in the day when you used to carry your own projector with you and had to set up the projector and thing. So I'm going to set up the projector, and the people are starting to come in, and they're seating, and I'm setting up the projector. And the projector wasn't high enough. I needed some books. So I went to take some books. And everybody, okay, I won't take those books. You do learn. I don't know if any of you are aware of this, but if you want to Google Rick Lavoie in Crown Heights, I spoke there a couple of years ago, and there were a number of elders in the community who didn't like that idea at all. And they published, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, a Pashkavelum. Didn't know what that was. And our kids lived in Brooklyn at the time, and so my son came home from, I done something in the morning, and I was still out, and my son came and he said to my wife, to his mom, he said, I want to hear Dad speak tonight. Do you know where he's speaking? And she said, no. And he said, well, I'll try to find it online. And he goes online, and there are these articles. It's Rick Lavoie from the Garden of Delphi, from the Garden of Eden. And I had no idea this was going on. I had absolutely no idea this was going on. But there was a huge uproar that they didn't think it was appropriate that I speak to the teachers. And I took a cab over there, and I got out very, very nervously. They ended up having 400 people who came, despite the fact that they were instructed not to. And as I got out of the cab, several rabbis just surrounded me, and they said, we're glad you're here. It was a very welcoming thing. And there was a very elderly rabbi who said, don't listen to everything that's going on. You're wonderful, so welcome you're here. So glad you're here. And I said, fine. And we got done. I came off the stage, and I ran to the rabbi, and I said, what'd you think, Rabbi? Well, it's pretty good. You talked about dinosaurs, but that's just a mistake you make. I need to talk something about teaching kids about dinosaurs. I was in a community in Miami a couple of weeks ago, and I always say to people, if I make a mistake, because I'm going to be doing this for a long time, if I make a mistake, please let me know. Just let me know that I've made a mistake. And somebody wrote me and said, I really enjoyed your presentation, but you drank out of a water bottle. You probably shouldn't have done that. Okay, I know. Now I know. I'm learning. It's a process. It truly is a process. But the reason that I'm here is not because of the differences, but because of the similarities. That my philosophy, the way I've always felt, just fits hand in glove with the Jewish educational community. One of your beliefs that's way, way, way back in your writings is that the responsibility of the community to educate all children. It said somewhere in your writings, one of my rabbi friends said, that a community that doesn't educate all children is destined for disaster. That it's your job not just to educate the best and the brightest, but to educate all children. And beyond that, in your writings, it says that if the child can't learn the way we teach, we have to teach the way that he learns. Now, that's what I've been saying for my entire 40-year career. And it just dovetails so perfectly with the way that you folks feel. And it's one of the things that strikes me so much about Jewish educational communities is your concern for children. Your respect for children, your respect for the dignity of children. One of my rabbi friends gave me this quote from one of your writings. When a child walks down the road, a company of angels goes before him proclaiming, make way for the perfect image of the chosen one. But the reality is not all of our kids are perfect. Not through no fault or choice of their own. Many kids struggle with learning, struggle with things that are so much easier for other kids, as our friend Malky did. And so through this experience, I've had an opportunity to meet some wonderful people. I've had an opportunity to do some wonderful readings and learn about things I never learned before, I never knew before. And it's been a real voyage for me. And I wanted to share one thing that I learned from a Jewish educator of the past that I've never met and will not meet until later, I hope. And I spoke to Abe at some length about him, and his name is Yanis Korchak. Yanis Korchak, how many of you have heard of Yanis Korchak? Yeah, the list is getting bigger, but most people haven't. And he was an educator in Poland in the 1930s. But he was, every time I talk about Korchak, I find it very difficult to describe what he was like, because there's nobody in the American public scene today that is like him. He was a surgeon. He was a pediatrician. He had the #1 radio show in Warsaw, Poland for 25 years. He was an entertainer. He had a radio show for kids. He was a top children's writer in Eastern Europe for 40 years. His books are still being read all over Eastern Europe. He was just an amazingly Renaissance man that had many strengths and many weaknesses and many real magical talents. And very late in his life, the plight of the Jewish orphans in Poland. That in Poland, if you were an orphan, and of course it wasn't uncommon to be an orphan in the early part of the 20th century, and if you were an orphan and you were Jewish, you were not allowed to go to a Christian orphanage or to a public orphanage. And so he decided he would start an orphanage. And because he was a very famous and a very well-known man, a friend of his donated to him this beautiful mansion in downtown Warsaw, and he turned it into an orphanage. And the amazing thing about him is he was so far ahead of his time. He was so far ahead of his time. He, some of the things that he did, they had a children's court. He had a great deal of respect for the sense of justice that children had. And in the orphanage, there was a children's court. If a child did something wrong, he wasn't brought before a tribunal of the adults. He was brought before a tribunal of children. And the children would decide what the consequence would be. And because of their sense of justice, there's a wonderful story that Korchak would tell that there was a boy who snuck into the kitchen, broke into the kitchen one evening, and ate 25 donuts. And he went on trial the next day. He went on trial. You know what the sentence was? One of the children stood up and said, "Look, he threw up all night. I was with him. He threw up all night. That's punishment enough. He won't do it again." And they didn't give him a punishment. That's real justice. And that's something they're doing in schools now in 2019. He was doing it in 1930. They had their own newspaper. They sold a newspaper in the streets of Warsaw, a newspaper the kids that the orphans wrote. They each time a new orphan came in, they got a mentor, someone that worked with them to get them accustomed to the rules and the ins and outs of the orphanage. That's something we're just starting to do in schools now for new students. He was so far ahead of his time. The students graded themselves. But the thing was that Korchak believed in, what he believed so strongly is, his most famous quote is this: "Children are not the people of tomorrow. They're people today. And they should be treated with dignity. And they should be treated with respect. And they're entitled to a past, a present, and a future." And so, as I read and heard more and more about Malky, those just echoed with me, that the dignity that she had, the beauty that she had in so many ways. Now we're going to talk about the things that Malky taught us without really realizing she did. But one of the most important things I think that I learned from Korchak is he used to talk to his staff about what he called moments of clarity. Moments in your career where something happens with a kid, or someone says something, or you read something, or you hear something, and it becomes a moment of clarity. And suddenly everything becomes clear. It's like when you've got a camera and you're trying to focus on it, and you don't have the focus right, and you finally get it right, suddenly everything becomes clear. And what his advice was, think about that in your career as teachers and as parents. to look for these moments of clarity and to use them and to never forget them and to use them to grow and to learn lessons that will carry you through your career. And when I read this, I started thinking that many of the things that I believe in so strongly as an educator came from moments of clarity. And let me share a couple with you if I can. One happened in my own home. You never know when moments of clarity are going to happen. It happened in my own home. My wife and I went to service one Sunday morning, and the priest stood up at the service, and he announced that they were starting Project Children in our community. I don't know if Project Children got here to the Brooklyn area, but it was very, very big in New England and in Massachusetts. And here's what it was. It was in 1984. And if you remember, in 1984, in Belfast, Northern Ireland, there was a tremendous amount of terrorist activity. There were bombings. They were blowing up marketplaces. They blew up a theater. They were killing men, women, and children with absolutely no sense or no order or certainly no decency. And it was a very, very dangerous place to be, Belfast, Northern Ireland. And so somebody came up with an idea called Project Children, where they would take children from the war-torn areas of Belfast and bring them to the United States to spend a summer with an American family and kind of get away from all that and decompress and get a chance to learn a little bit about America at the same time. And they made this announcement. We got home and I said to my wife, I said, gee, that sounds like a great idea. I said, we live on the campus of a school. There's a swimming pool. There's a gymnasium. There are an art room. There are dark rooms. They can do photography. This would be a great place for a kid to spend a summer. Why don't we bring one of those kids over here? And she said, that really is a good idea. Let's do that. She said, but you know what? You're going to be traveling a lot next year. And the kids might not want to share you. They might not want to share you with anybody. So why don't we ask the kids and see what they think? And I said, okay. So we sat down with our three kids. Christopher at the time was 11. Danny was 5. Megan was 3. And we sat down with them and we told them about the bombings in Belfast and that we want to bring this little boy over to us and live in our house for the summer. Christopher thought it was a great idea. He was 11 years old. Megan thought it was a great idea because Chris thought it was a great idea. But Dan, the little guy in the middle, 5 years old at the time, didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to talk about it. Every time it would come up, he'd leave the room. So finally, I said, well, I better sit down and talk to him. So I went up to his room one evening and sat in the edge of his bed, and I said, Dan, we really want to bring a little boy over here from Ireland to spend the summer with us. We'd really like to do that. You don't want to. And if you don't want to, we won't. But I can give you a lot of good reasons why we should. You've got to give me some good reasons why we shouldn't. He starts to sob, and he was not a crier. He starts to sob. I'm so scared, Daddy. I said, honey, why are you scared? He said, you said there's a little boy over in Ireland, and people are trying to blow him up. What if they find out where he is and they come and blow up our house? Stupid, stupid, stupid. PhD, stupid. I never looked at it through his eyes. Through my eyes, this was a wonderful thing to do. Through his eyes, a 5-year-old child, he thinks the only kind of violence he understands is what he sees on television, which is if I want to kill you, I look for you till I find you and I kill you. He's perceiving it as there's a little boy over in Ireland that people are trying to kill, and Dad's going to bring him over here, and he's going to sleep in my room. And when he said that, I realized what a mistake I made as a father. I didn't look at it through his eyes. And everything that I've done since then, everything I've done since then in my career has been trying to get teachers to look at the world through the eyes of kids. I do a lot of school kickoff events where I meet with teachers at the beginning of the school year, and I say to them, "You're a first grade teacher. You get the classroom or kindergarten teacher. You get your classroom all set up, ready to go the first day of school, the day before the kids arrive. The day before they arrive, you get your room set up, and then you get down on your knees and you walk around that classroom on your knees. See what it looks like when you're 3 feet tall. See what it looks like when you're 3 feet tall. Look at, is the pencil sharpener low enough that every kid can sharpen his own pencil? Is the construction paper low enough that everyone can reach it? Look at it through the eyes of kids. And that belief that has controlled my career for the last 40 years came from that one moment of clarity where I realized what a mistake I was making by not looking at the world through the eyes of kids. We need to understand that the big mistake, I think, I'm in the twilight of my career. I'm wandering into the woods now, and my career is coming to an end. And I look over my shoulder, and the thing that worries me the most about the way we're raising children is people say every kid should come with an instruction booklet. So you get a refrigerator, you get a new tape recorder, you get a new TV set, you get an instruction booklet. We should have an instruction booklet for kids. There never will be one. But what we need to do, and if I were king, I would insist that every parent and every teacher take a course in human development. One of the reasons we're making so many mistakes with kids today is we have just forgotten everything we know about human development. These kids develop according to a plan, and it's a really good plan. And every time we try to mess around with that plan, and we send bright 14-year-old kids off to college and do those kinds of things, no. We got to remember and look at the world through the eyes of kids. My wife and I were at the beach this past summer, and I love watching kids. My specialty is social skills with kids, social interaction with kids. And I love watching kids. And we're sitting on the beach, and suddenly this young mom shows up with 6 little kids, ages maybe 3 to 11. Okay? Some of them were hers, some of them were the neighbor's kids she got saddled with. But anyway, here she's got these 6 little kids, and they bring all their stuff, and they plop themselves down on the beach. And I start looking at the kids, and I pick out the one. I can always pick out, I've been doing this a long time. I can pick out the one. Watch this kid. He's the one that's going to give you a story. And he was a little 5-year-old kid, and he was running. He was attention deficit. You could tell he was running around, having a great old time. And he goes up to his mother, and he said, "Mom, can I have a dry towel? I'm cold." She said, "Where's your towel? It's all wet." "How did it get wet?" "Well, I took it down and I filled it with mud to build a sandcastle, and now it's all wet and covered with sand, and I'm really cold. Can I have a towel?" And she said, "Okay, I'm going to give you this towel, but I want you to listen to me. This is the last dry towel we have. It's your sister's towel. Do not get it wet. Do you understand? Do not get it wet." "I won't, Mommy." He sits down on the blanket, wraps himself in the towel, then suddenly gets up and starts walking around the beach. And I'm thinking, this will not end well. He starts walking around the beach, wrapped in the towel, and he starts walking into the water. And he gets in the water about up to his ankles, then about up to his knees, then a little bit deeper. And as he's walking into the water, he's dutifully holding his arms up like this to keep the towel from getting wet. And he's walking into the water. He's about a little past his knees now, and he's got his arms up like this. The towel is completely dry. Somebody throws him a Frisbee. He reaches for it. The towel falls in the water, and now it's soaking wet. He picks it up, wrings it out, very sheepishly brings it up to Mom. "Mom, the towel got wet." "Why did you leave the blanket? Why did you go into the water? Why did you drop into the water? Why did you get the towel wet?" And she's all over him with all these why questions. And I'm sitting on my blanket, and I'm thinking, I could solve this mystery in 3 words. Why did he leave the blanket? Why did he walk in the water? Why did he drop the towel? 3 words, Ma. Because he's 5. That's what 5-year-old kids do. You see, 5-year-old kids don't have what's called consequential thought. You and I have consequential thought. You and I know that if you have something that you want to keep dry, the closer you get to the water, the more likely it is to get wet. You and I both know that. That's what's called consequential thought. You know when you develop that? About 7 years old. 5-year-olds don't have consequential thought. Why did he leave the blanket? Why did he drop the towel? Why did he get the towel wet? Because he's 5. Because he's 5. And if we understood human development, we wouldn't get so upset with our kids. How many of you are raising adolescents? How many of you are raising more than one at a time? Yeah, you're the folks who are saying, we can stay till 7 tonight, Rick. There's really no reason to get home. Let me tell you the key. Here's the key to raising adolescents. You'll be much more effective raising your adolescent if and when you understand this one very simple concept. And once you understand this concept, it makes it much easier to raise your teenagers. You ready for it? You need to accept the fact that you cannot win. Once you realize you can't win, you stop all the power struggles. For an example, you're a mom. You got a 14-year-old daughter. You're walking through the shopping mall with your 14-year-old daughter, and you run into a group of your daughter's friends. Okay? Your 14-year-old daughter, you run into a group of your daughter's friends. There are 2 mistakes you can make at the juncture, Mom. One mistake is to ignore her friends, to not talk to her friends, big mistake. The other mistake is to talk to her friends. And once you realize no matter what you do, you're wrong. Mother, you said hello, we don't say hello. I'll have to change schools now. And if we understood human development, we would get that. We would understand why they do those things. Why do we get angry at our adolescents? Because all they do is eat and sleep and eat and sleep and eat and sleep. Okay, let's take a look at it from a developmental point of view. The second biggest period of growth in the human body is adolescence. You can gain 30 pounds and grow 8 inches in a period of a year or two. The second greatest period of growth is adolescence. What's the first greatest period of growth? Infancy. You can double your weight and double your size in the period of a year. What do infants do to fuel that incredible growth? What do they need in order to fuel that growth? Food and rest. Eat and sleep. Now, we don't get angry at our infants because they want to eat and sleep all day, but we get angry at our adolescents because they want to eat and sleep all day, and yet it's for the same reason. They're fueling this tremendous growth. And we need to understand how that works. We need to understand a little bit more about human development. I've been given some tremendous gifts. I've met some tremendous people with my interaction with the Jewish educational community. And they're the wrong way. For Malky, when I started hearing the story and sharing the story with my friend Abe, I thought of a gift that I was given in my journey with the Jewish educational community. I had an opportunity, I spoke at a synagogue one time several years ago, and I had the opportunity to meet a gentleman named Dr. Fred Epstein. And it reminded me so much I thought so much of him. He's no longer with us, but I thought so much of him when I heard the story of Malky. Fred Epstein was an amazing, amazing person. I was honored to call him my friend. He was a surgeon at the Beth Israel Hospital, at Beth Israel here in New York. And he was almost magical in his ability to perform an operation that literally no other doctors could perform, and that is childhood tumors on the spinal cord. Literally 100% of doctors, if you say the child has got a tumor on his spinal cord, they step back and say, we cannot do anything. Nothing can be done. Well, he came up with a way to do it. And he got international, he was on 60 Minutes, he got international attention because he saved the lives of dozens and dozens of children with this very unique 15-hour surgery that was done that he would do to cure a kid that had just really, really been beyond hope. He was an amazing, amazing guy. And of course, every hospital wanted him to work with them. And so he was kind of like a most valuable player. And they called him from Beth Israel, and they said, we'd like you to come and work with us. And he said, okay, but you've got to give me my own unit with complete control over the unit. And they said, yes, they would. Listen to the things that he did. He wrote a book, if you're interested in this. He wrote a book called If I Get to 5. And that's from a little 4-year-old girl who had a terrible, terrible cancer and said to him one day, if I get to 5, I want to learn how to jump rope. Imagine being a 4-year-old and looking at your life in the months ahead rather than the years ahead. And he went to Beth Israel and he said, we're going to make some changes in the way we do things here. Listen to some of the things he did. He put washing machines in the unit. So the parents who were sitting this horrible ordeal with their kids can just throw their clothes on a washing machine and not have to go home. He put day beds in there. So somebody could stay in every room is a private room, and they had day beds. There were no visiting hours. You could come at 3 o'clock in the morning. If you had the need to hold your baby at 3 in the morning, you could. He allowed dogs. He allowed sleepovers. The kids that were in the hospital for a long time could have their friends for sleepovers. He had musicians walking the hallways playing music. When a kid went into surgery, they'd go in the special cart with a big light, and they'd ride down into surgery, and all the kids would come out of the rooms and wave to their friend who was going into surgery. He broke all the rules. He broke all the rules by allowing the parents to be in pre-op and post-op. So the last thing that baby saw as she fell asleep from the anesthetic was her mom's face. And the first thing she saw when she woke up was her mom's face. I mean, that's genius. All the doctors are known by their first names. And they didn't wear scrubs. They wore street clothes to make the kids feel more comfortable. He was an extraordinary person who really understood the nature of kids who struggle. He understood the soul of kids. And one of my favorite things that he did gives you an idea what Fred was like. He was in his office one day, and the secretary came in, and she said, boy, you get some nuts in this business, but I really had a crazy one just now. And he said, what's that? He said, a gentleman called from Saudi Arabia and had heard about your surgery. And he has a dog with a cancer on its spinal cord and wants to know if you'll do the surgery. So I'll just call him back and say that's not possible. And he said, no, wait a second. Give me his number. I'll call him. He called the guy back. He said, you have a whole lot of money, don't you? And he said, yes, I do. He said, I'll tell you what you do. You send the dog to me. I'll do the surgery. There's a kid in Akron, Ohio who needs the same surgery, and they can't afford it. You pick up the hospital bill and all the expenses for that family, and I'll do the surgery on your dog, and everybody came out fine. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. He was just that kind of guy. But it reminded me so much of Malky, because as Rivka and Abe went through this, you naturally look back and you say, I mean, I sat next to Abe as you're running the film. What did I do right? What did I do wrong? Why does this happen? Why does this happen? And somebody asked Fred one day, why do children suffer? They said, why do children suffer? And he said, children suffer to break our hearts. Our hearts are broken and they'll never fully heal. They ache. But the broken heart becomes a more loving instrument, and only when the heart is broken and is open are we finally able to love without boundaries. That's what Abe's doing. Is basically his heart's been broken, but he's taken everything he learned and all of his experiences and sharing it with the world to help those Malkys that you know are in your classroom every day, because they are there. What did we learn from him? From, again, listening to the interview, what did we learn from Malky? First of all, I don't know if this means anything to you or not, Abe, is the parents did everything right. As I listened to that interview, he'd say, this happened. I'd say, well, okay, Abe, then you should do this. And he'd say in the next sentence, and we did this. Everything they did is what they should have done and what they could have done. Sometimes it's beyond the parents' control. I had the opportunity to go to Amsterdam in a speaking engagement a while ago. And I was so anxious to go to see the Anne Frank house. I had taught the diary to dozens and dozens of kids when I was a teacher. And I went to see it, and of course it's a striking, amazing thing to see and a sacred place to be. But what I was most struck with is as you leave, there's a loop of Otto Frank, Anne's dad. Now, if you remember the story, Otto had no idea she was keeping a diary. It was totally secret, and he went back to the place after the war was over, and he found it and published it. But he really had no idea what was going on. And as you leave, there's a loop of Otto, and he says this. Oh, wait a minute. No, I'll tell you what he says. What he says is that you will never fully know your children. He said you will never completely know your child. He said, I lived with my daughter. She was 13 to 14 years old. I lived with her literally for 3 years in the same room, 24/7. We talked and talked and talked for 3 years, as close physically and emotionally as a parent could be to a child, for 3 years. And when I read those diaries, I had no idea she was having those thoughts. I had no idea she was struggling with all that stuff. I mean, we can never fully know. So you certainly did nothing wrong. One of the things that really struck me was the comment that she made, and I think Abe backed it up, that there was one comment made to her, and I believe it was second grade, I guess, where a teacher told her, you read like a first grader, she'd be back in first grade. She never, ever forgot that. There are so many times we say things to kids without realizing the impact that it has, without realizing the damage that we're doing. You say something to a kid, I ask you 5 minutes later what you said, you don't remember, but that child will carry it with her for the rest of her life. And that one comment, unbeknownst to the teacher, I'm sure who said it, was a burden that she carried forever. One of the things that he said in the interview, how many of you have seen the Fat City video? Okay. The Fat City video, I'll tell you where that came from. I'll tell you where the genesis of that was, where the birth of that was. I was a young teacher, and I had this kid in my class named Craig. It was a residential school in Massachusetts. I had Craig. He was 13 years old. I had him for a one-to-one tutorial. I had him 1 hour a day to teach him read, write, and spell, just me and him. Just me and him. And he was a great kid, very resilient kid. He was an athlete, really tough, wonderful kid. And I asked him to do a composition for me one day. I said, take this paper home and write a composition for me about your dog. And he went back to the dormitory that night and he wrote a composition, gave it back to me the next day. I took it home, sat down with it, took it out of my briefcase, took out his composition, took out my red pencil. I don't own a red pencil anymore, but I had a lot of them then. And I started making corrections in the paper, and I caught every single mistake, every spelling mistake, capitalization error, every mistake he made on that paper, I marked in red. Next day, I walked into class, and to my great surprise, Craig was actually sitting there in class. He was actually sitting there waiting for me. Now, he was generally on time. He was sometimes late, but he was never, ever early for class, and he was actually sitting there waiting for me. And I came in, I said, hey, Craig, you're here on time. That's great. We can get started. He said, yeah, Mr. Lavoie, did you get a chance to read my paper last night? Did you read my paper last night? I said, yeah, I did. He said, what'd you think of it? I said, yeah, I thought it was great. It was terrific. Reminded me of my dog when I was a kid. It was really terrific. And I said, but we got to talk about some of the mistakes you made. And I took the paper out. Now for the first time, he's seeing it since I got my hands on it. So I start going through and making the corrections with him. And I said, here, you spelled dog with a 7. There's no 7 in dog. He was one of those kinds of kids. And I looked to say something to him, and I looked, and there's a tear dribbling down the side of his face. Now, I'd seen Craig, as I said, he was an athlete. I'd seen him get hurt. I'd seen him get in fights. I'd seen this kid through everything. I never saw him come anywhere close to crying. And he's actually crying over the composition. So I had the wisdom to put the pencil down, and I turned to him, and I said, Craig, what's the matter? What's the problem? He said, Mr. Lavoie, I know you're doing your job. I know those are real mistakes in that paper, and I know it's your job to correct those mistakes. He said, but the night before last, after recess, all the kids went up to after supper, all the kids went up to play basketball. And I stayed in for an extra half hour just to proofread this paper. I thought it was perfect. I thought it was perfect. I couldn't wait to give it to you, and I couldn't wait to get it back from you. And look at all the mistakes I made. And I looked at Craig, and I put my hands on his shoulders, and I looked in his eyes and said the dumbest thing I've ever said to a struggling kid. I looked at Craig, and I said, Craig, I know how you feel. And he stood up and he said, you do not know how I feel. Tell me you'll help me. Tell me you understand me. Don't you dare tell me you know what this feels like, because you don't have a clue what this feels like. And he stormed out of the room. It took me 2 months to get that relationship back on track. And I've never said it to another kid. And Melky said to her dad one time, don't tell me you know what this feels like. Tell me you understand. Tell me you'll help me. But don't tell me what it feels. Don't tell me you know what it feels like, because you don't. And that gave me the idea of Fat City, because I realized that there's a great irony about educators and people who teach in schools. If you're a teacher, I'll tell you 2 things about you. One, you did pretty well in school. You got to have a degree to be a teacher, so the chances are you did pretty well in school. And secondly, if you're a teacher, you enjoyed going to school. If you didn't like going to school, you picked a really lousy profession, because you picked the only one that put you back there. So the great irony about education is that those of us who teach generally like going to school and did well when we were there. So who's the kid we can best understand? Who's the kid we can best relate to? Who's the kid whose company we enjoy? The kid who was like us, the scholar, the athlete, the hero, the kid who was like us. And who's the kid we can least understand? The kid who needs us the most. The Malkys. And I said, how can I come up with an activity that actually makes teachers feel what it's like to fail in school, to feel what it's like to struggle in school? And that gave birth to Fat City. We did it in 1987. I'll get 5 emails today when I get back to the hotel. I'll have 5 emails. You've got to update it. You've got to make a new one. No, just leave it alone. Just leave it alone. It tells the story. I'll be 34 for the rest of my life. Those are good years. So somebody came up to me speaking, you look so different. I said, well, you probably don't look a lot like your 1987 video either. Give me a break. But the reality is that was a moment of clarity that I had. It was a moment of clarity. You see, there's so many things we can do to kids. We have such power over kids. And we can say these things. We can say you belong in first grade. We've got the power to do that. We've got the power to destroy kids' lives. We've got the power to do that, but we don't have the right to do that. One of my favorite movies is Dr. Zhivago, and in Dr. Zhivago, if you remember, a member of the Red Guard comes and forces Zhivago to leave his home to go treat an ill soldier. And Zhivago is incensed about this. He says, I'm a free man. You have no right to drag me out of my home for no reason. And the soldier says, I'm a member of the Red Guard. That gives me the right. And Zhivago says, that gives you the power, not the right. You've got the power. You've got the power to humiliate kids. You've got the power to embarrass kids. But you don't have the right to do it. And some of those little comments we make to kids last forever. They just don't go away. One of the things we've learned from Malky, from the lesson she taught us, is something I've been teaching to students, teaching students for a long time, is we've got to teach kids how to build a support system. Malky had an amazing support system with her parents, but other parts of her support system maybe could have been stronger. And what I think we need to do is actually teach kids how to build a support system. How do you build a support system to get you through the tough times? All of us have a support system. I'm the last living American that still has a Rolodex. Some of you young people don't even know what that is. It's about this long. It's on my desk, and it has every business card I've ever collected. Abe's business card will go into it when I get home. That's my support system. Those are all people that I know, people I've met who would help me if I needed help. You see, kids think the older you get, the smaller your support system gets. Actually, the older you get, the bigger your support system gets. And let me tell you about two people. This is why it's so important to teach kids how to develop a support system, particularly when they're struggling. There are three things you do to build and to maintain a support system. And let me use two people as an example, two people who are in my support system. One is a gentleman named Dr. Robert Brooks. How many of you know Bob Brooks, psychologist from the Harvard Medical School? He's a great personal friend, and he's also a brilliant, brilliant diagnostician when it comes to adolescent depression, okay? Dr. Bob Brooks is in my Rolodex. Another person in my Rolodex is Wally. Wally is a guy who lives on Cape Cod, where we now live, and he fixes Volkswagens. And in the summertime, I drive a 1972 cherry red Carmen Ghia convertible. Remember the old Carmen Ghias? They're not fast, they're not expensive, you just can't find them anymore. And I wanted one since I was a kid, and heaven bless her, on my 25th wedding anniversary, I walked out in the driveway and there was a 1972 Carmen Ghia, the year we were married. And that's my favorite thing in the world, okay? And he's the only guy on Cape Cod who knows how to fix an air-cooled engine. His name is Wally. He has been in my Rolodex for 30 years, as Bob has been on Rolodex for 30 years. If I stopped right now and called either one of those men, they would answer the phone, they would take my call. Why are they still in my Rolodex after 30 years? Because I've done three things. First of all, I've used the support system when it's appropriate, okay? If my car won't start, I'm not going to call Dr. Brooks and say, hey, am I having trouble with my car? If I come across a desk, a very complex case of adolescent depression, I'm not going to call Wally. I use them appropriately. Now, my brother passed away a while ago. One of the first calls I made was to Bob Brooks. Not because he's a psychologist, but because he's a friend. And he recently lost his brother. And I knew he'd understand. And I knew he'd empathize, and we'd talk. So I called Bob Brooks. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to call Wally and say, Wally, my brother passed away. I'd like to go out and have coffee with you and talk about it. He'd say, what are you calling me for? I'm a mechanic. In fact, as I give this, I realize I don't even know Wally's last name. And yet he's been in my Rolodex and has been for 30 years because I use it appropriately. Secondly, I reciprocate. I was getting my car fixed one time, and I heard Wally mention to somebody that his son was having trouble in school. He's being bullied in school. So I went out and had one of my books in the car, and I gave it to him, and I said, this might be helpful for you. I give it, and not only do I make withdrawals from the support system, I also make deposits, okay? If Bob called me right now, if Bob called me as soon as I got off here, I would take his call. Because I would expect he's going to take my call, I'm going to take his call. I reciprocate. Now, if I stop taking Bob's calls after 3 or 4 calls, he would stop taking mine, right? So in order to maintain the system, use it appropriately, reciprocate, and you've got to nurture that support system. I nurture that support system all the time. I was in California a couple of weeks ago, and I saw this beautiful old Volkswagen, a 55 Volkswagen with a small window. I took a picture and sent it off to Wally. Wally, I look at the Volkswagen I saw in San Francisco. Isn't it great? That's a way of saying, I'm thinking of you. I don't just call you when I need you. I don't just make withdrawals from the support system. I'm also going to make deposits. If I read an article, Abe exposed me to this incredible book, which they're selling it back. Get a copy. It is. We'll talk about this in a minute. One of the first things I did is wrote to Bob Brooks and said, hey, Bob, I just ran across this terrific book and want to take a look at. In other words, Bob, I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just keeping that relationship alive. And you've got to teach kids how to do that, that they've got to build a support system. But the way you build it is to use it appropriately, reciprocate, and nurture that support system. Those 2 men will be in my support system, hopefully, for the next 30 years, because we do those 3 things, and that's something that we can learn from Malky. Mistakes were made. Mistakes were made in terms of her education, and as the more I read and the more I heard, the more those mistakes became very, very, very visible. Mistakes not made by mom or dad, but mistakes made by the institution. As you hear Malky's story, you realize there were some genuine heroes. There were also some villains who probably didn't mean to be villains, but they just didn't understand. And she ran into some schools that run themselves according to what I call a triage program. You know, okay, they run according to triage. Does your school run this way? Because if it does run this way, you're going to miss Malky's. You're going to miss the kids. You're going to miss some of the magical kids. Here's what triage is. Triage, as you probably know, is a medical term. Let's say that the whole bunch of us are on a bus, and the bus is driving down the road, and the bus tips over, hits something, tips over, and rolls around, and we're all, there's, say, 25 of us, 30 of us lying around in the street in various levels of injury. Emergency medical workers, when they arrive, are trained to do what's called triage. They're trained not to give any medical help. Their job is not to give any medical help. Their job is to identify each person by their level of injury and put a tag on them, okay? And there are 3 groups. Say that an accident of 30 of us are lying on the ground in various stages of injury. The ambulance drivers, the first responders get there, and they put tags on us, colored tags to identify us, and then so when the real medical teams arrive, they're going to be able to offer help, okay? Group A, let's say that this group of people over here is in Group A. Group A are people with minor injuries. Group A are people who are going to live anyway. No matter if they get emergency medical attention or not, Group A is going to live anyway. Group B have severe injuries. They're going to die anyway. No matter what's done for them, their injuries are mortal, their injuries are fatal, they're going to die anyway. Group C are people who need emergency medical attention in order to survive. So Group A, minor injuries, they're going to live anyway if they don't get help. Group B, mortal injuries, they're going to die anyway whether or not they get help. And Group C are people who need immediate medical attention in order to survive. And they identify us and they put tags on all of us. When the medical professionals arrive, the conventional wisdom is that 80% of the attention, 80% of the manpower goes to which group? Group C. 10% go to give first aid to the people with minor injuries, 10% go to comfort the dying, and 80% go to deliver emergency medical services in order for those people to live. Is that a good idea? I don't know. It's been around since World War I. It seems to work. Certainly, if I had minor injuries, I would say, well, it's a blessing for me. I'm fine. Go take care of the people with worse injuries. If me or a member of my family was mortally injured, I'd understand that maybe the attention needs to go someplace else. And certainly if I was in Group C, it's a really good idea. But that has dripped into schools now. And what we do is we look at kids and we say, Group A, this kid's going to make it anyway. Whether or not he gets any help, he's going to make it anyway. He's fine. Let's not give him any attention. Group C, the Malkys, they're not going to make it anyway. They're not going to make it. They're not going to bring glory to our school. And so let's forget about Group B. Let's spend all of our time on Group C. I would submit to you that that's contrary to your heritage. It's contrary to the heritage that you're so proud of. You don't ever write off kids. You don't ever say, this kid is not going to make it. How do we know? How do we know? And the more you give the kid the message that he or she's not going to make it, the deeper they go into that hole. Well, Malky found herself. The deeper they go into that hole. You see, here's a mistake that was made with Malky and so many other kids. Schools always ask kids, schools now ask people this question. How are you smart? That's the how smart are you? That's the wrong question. The right question is, how are you smart? I mean, those drawings that Malky did, those were amazing. And from what I understand, she didn't even begin to draw until she was well into her teens. What if somebody had recognized that talent? What if somebody had recognized that skill and moved her along that path? What a different life she would have had. The reality is we should not be asking, how smart are you? We should be asking, how are you smart? And perhaps if that was done, it would be different. Let's learn some lessons. The entire point of the work that Abe and Rivka are doing is to let her life teach us some lessons. So what lessons have we taught? What lessons have we learned? The most important one, that if a child is struggling, that child needs from you two things: support and challenge. You need to constantly challenge a child. Keep the carrot at the end of that. Keep the carrot at the end of the stick. Constantly challenging the child to work forward, but giving them the support he needs to meet that challenge. Now, if she ran into some schools, it appears, who supported her a great deal, but they didn't really challenge her. And other schools who gave her a tremendous challenge, but didn't give her the support she needed to reach that challenge. It's got to be that balance of challenge and support. That's exactly what special ed is. That's a definition of special education, is providing the kid with a challenge so they work toward their fullest potential, but the support they need to meet that challenge. Lessons we've learned, lessons we can learn from her and her life, that learning disabilities is a very generic term. This is what's very, very frustrating for you as regular ed teachers, that basically the special education folks send a child to your program, into your class. He's got some special needs, some learning disabilities. You put together all this work, you modify the work, and you give the kid the modified work, and he does great. And he does so well that your reward is they ask you to take another one the next year. And you take another one in the next year and you say, it's not a problem. I got all this stuff all done. I got a whole file of modifications for learning disabled kids. And you do those modifications, and guess what? It doesn't work. Because not only are these kids different from the general population, they're also very different one from another. I can tell an effective school or even an effective book, if it says, this is what we do for all kids with learning disabilities, then you don't get it. Because not only is the child different from the other regular ed children, they're also very different one from another, which is why we talk so much about individualization. We need to understand that learning disabilities is a very pervasive term. It's very pervasive. In other words, it impacts on everything that they do. It is literally 24/7. I used to say that learning disabilities impacts on every waking moment of the child's life, but I've changed that now because, there's some research being done at Johns Hopkins that indicates it impacts on them when they're asleep. That kids with attention deficit disorder, it actually impacts on them when they're asleep. I'll tell you what I mean. If you had a good night's sleep last night, here's what happened. You went to bed at 10 o'clock, and for about 20 minutes, you're in what's called a twilight sleep, a very light sleep. You can be very, very easily woken up. It's called a twilight sleep. Then you go into a deep sleep cycle. It's called REM, rapid eye movement sleep. You go into a deep sleep cycle. And you're in a deep sleep cycle for about 15, 20, 25 minutes. Then you come out and you're in a light sleep cycle again. And then you go down and you're in a deep sleep cycle again. Then you go through 7 or 8 of those light and deep sleep cycles every night. But understand that the only rest you get is from the deep sleep cycles. The light sleep cycles are not very restful. That's why, have you ever noticed when you wake up in the middle of the night, it's often the same time? You say, why do I keep waking up at 3:20? Because at 3:20, you're in a light sleep cycle. So when the dog barks next door, it wakes you up. If the dog barked at 4:20, in fact, it probably did bark at 4:20, but you're in a deep sleep cycle and it didn't wake you up. So you go through 7 or 8 of these a night, and you wake up feeling refreshed. Research is now showing the kids with attention deficit disorder never get into those deep sleep cycles. They spend their entire night in a twilight sleep. So the teacher calls mom and says, put the kid to bed early. Make sure he's always yawning in class. He's tired, put him to bed early. Mom do this. If he puts him to bed at 8 o'clock, checks him at 9 o'clock, he's asleep, checks him at 10 o'clock, he's asleep. He wakes up in the morning, every bit as tired as when he went to bed the night before. It's a very pervasive disability. And here's the example I use to show how the kid's academic problems can impact on other parts of his life. Okay? Raise your hand if you have ever dealt with a kid with a learning disability who has difficulty spelling. That was just an aerobic activity. That was just to get the blood flowing. Yeah, most of our kids can't spell. One of the reasons they can't spell is because of a skill called revisualization. Revisualization. Abe uses a skill of revisualization whenever he spells. If I were to ask Gabe to spell the word America for me, he would use a skill of revisualization. He'd picture the word America in his mind, and he would call off the letters to me. Either that, or as he called them off, they would flash up on a screen in front of him. You use a skill of revisualization in order to spell. That's why, sometimes you pick up a flyer from the supermarket, and it says cantaloupes 59 cents, and you say, hey, that's spelled wrong. That's not how you spell cantaloupe. And then someone says, well, how do you spell it? I don't know, but I know that's wrong. That's because you can picture in your mind's eye what cantaloupe should look like, and it doesn't look like that. So Abe uses a skill of revisualization whenever he spells. Many of our kids can't revisualize, therefore they can't spell. Raise your hand if you'll accept that. Yeah, the research backs me up on that. But do you realize the kid who can't spell because he can't revisualize will also have a great deal of difficulty keeping his room clean at home? For the same reason? Because Abe not only uses a skill of revisualization when he spells, he also uses it when he cleans a room at home. So Gabe has a big party for family and friends at his home. Everybody leaves at the end of the party. He walks into the kitchen. The kitchen is a pit, dirty dishes, pots, pans all over the place. You know how he cleans it without even realizing it? He pictures the kitchen clean in his mind. He makes a mental picture of what the kitchen looks like clean. And then he does things to it until it matches that picture. That's how you wash a car on a Saturday. That's the way you wash a car on a Sunday morning. You look at the car. See, I told you. I caught it. Point. Yeah. You look at the car. It's dirty. You picture it clean. And then you do things to it until it matches that picture. So Abe uses skill of revisualization when he spells and when he cleans a room at home. Do you think the kid who can't revisualize in school suddenly develops the skill of revisualization when he goes home? No. So dad throws him in the bedroom and says, don't come out till this room is clean. He looks around the room. He can't picture what it looks like clean, so he's got no idea where to begin. So he picks up a magazine. He looks at it, says, whoa, I haven't seen this, and sits down, starts reading the magazine. Dad comes in 10 minutes later. It's World War III because he's not cleaning the room. He can't do it because he can't picture what the room looks like clean. He's got no idea how to make that result happen. Asking a kid who can't revisualize to clean his own room is exactly like doing this. Suppose I went to that little toy store I saw down the street when I arrived today, and I bought a 200-piece jigsaw puzzle. And I gave it to these 10 people sitting up front. And I said, here's a 200-piece jigsaw puzzle. You got 3 hours to put it together. Do you think you could do that? Yeah, sure, you could probably do that. 8 bright people, 2 hours, sure, you could do that. But suppose I did this. Suppose I opened up the box, threw the box away, put the pieces in a bag, shook up the bag, and handed you the bag of pieces and said, put this puzzle together. It said, well, where's the box top? I don't know, I threw it away. Well, what is it? Is it a duck? Is it the Eiffel Tower? What is it? Just put this puzzle together. Could you do that in 3 hours? 5 hours? 5 months? Probably not. Because you got no idea what the end product is going to look like. You got no idea how to get to that end product. Asking the kid who can't revisualize to clean his own room is exactly like asking these people to put together a puzzle without knowing what it's going to look like at the end. So what I recommend is you get up early every morning, Mom, and clean the room for the child, right? No. I'm a big believer in independence for these kids. Big believer in independence. You know what you do, by the way, and it works like a charm. Get the room clean. Take a camera and take a picture of the room from different angles. You got it. Take a picture of the room from different angles and put them up in the bulletin board. Now he doesn't need to revisualize. Now we can look at the picture and say, well, in this picture, there are no clothes on the table, and there are clothes on the table over there. He put those away. And in this picture, there are all books on the floor, and there are books on the floor. I better put them in the bookshelf. I'm not saying you should do everything for kids. All I'm saying is you need to understand that they're going to, that it's going to impact on everything that they do. As we go through this, we're going to use some terms, and we want to make sure that you understand what those terms mean. I often hear people using these three terms interchangeably as if they mean the same thing, and they don't. They're very, very different. People say, oh, he's got a serious handicap, it's a serious disability, a serious impairment. They're three very different things, and it's important you understand this if you're going to understand what we're going to be doing for the rest of the day. Impairment means the nature of the damage, the nature of the difference. Disability means the limitations that puts on you, and the handicap means its impact on every day. Let me explain it more simply. I am developing in my left hand a fairly serious case of arthritis. I'm not surprised. I'm at the age that I should. My father had it. My grandfather had it. I'm not surprised. I'm developing a pretty good case of arthritis in my left hand. The impairment is the fact that there is liquid that forms around the knuckle that misshapes the knuckle. That's the impairment. The disability is that I can't really make a tight fist anymore. I can't make a real tight fist with my left hand, okay? The handicap is when I'm playing golf or playing tennis or using something that when I'm raking in the yard, something that requires a tight grip, okay? So the impairment is the damaged knuckle. The disability is I can't bend it, and the handicap is when I'm playing tennis or when I'm raking the lawn. When I'm reading, do I have an impairment? Yes. My knuckles still don't work. Do I have a disability? Yeah. I still can't close a fist. But do I have a handicap? No, because I don't need to make a fist in order to read. So we need to understand that the job of us as educators is to make sure that the impairments don't become handicaps. It's our job to deal with the impairment and the disability before it becomes a handicap. Now, what we're going to be talking about for the balance of the day is it's a workshop that I call Shoveling Off the Ramp. And what we're going to talk about is a movement called universal design. How many of you are familiar with universal design? Universal design, if you know my work at all, I don't jump on bandwagons very quickly. I'm kind of a traditionalist in education, but I am crazy about universal design. Okay? And I think it can change the way we educate. And so many of I was with the largest Jewish day school in Los Angeles last month, and we talked about universal design. They have embraced it really, really tightly. Let me tell you what universal design means. Who can tell me where the concept of universal design came from? Do you know what field it came from? Yes? Actually, it didn't. No. It came from the field of architecture. And here's what happened. In the 1970s, the government stepped in and said to architects, you need to make the public way accessible to people with handicaps. You need to make it such that kids with handicaps can get around that people with handicaps can get around the public way and use public buildings unencumbered. And they made all these changes that you and I see every day. You go to Walmart, you go to Target, you go to Rite Aid. There's that little button you can press to open the automatic door so a person using a wheelchair or on crutches can go shop the way you and I do. Okay? In every street corner in the United States, check it out in your own community. As of 1989, in every street corner in every city and town in the United States of America, at every street corner there needs to be at least one what's called a curb cut, which means instead of dropping off at a 90-degree angle, it slopes off at a 30-degree angle. Okay? So a person using a wheelchair can roll into the street rather than jump off the curb. In every public building where there's a bank of elevators, including the hotel I'm stayed in last night, in every public building where you walk into the first floor and there's a bank of elevators, by federal law, when you press the button for the elevator, there needs to be lights that are telling you which elevator is coming next. Did you know that's a federal law? And the reason for that is the research shows that a person who uses a wheelchair can get into the elevator before the door closes, but only if they're stationed in front of the elevator when the door opens. So they passed a law that said in a public building where there's a bank of elevators, you press a button, there needs to be lights to tell you when which elevator is coming next, so the person in the wheelchair can get stationed in front of the right door. And when the door opens, what do you hear? Ding. That's telling the blind person that the door is open and they can safely step into the elevator. And in order to have a television station, a license for a television station in the United States, every show you broadcast needs to be available in closed captioning so that people with hearing losses can watch and enjoy TV the way you and I do. And when they made all these changes in a public way, and you know what they came to realize? They were just good ideas. They were just good ideas that work for everybody. I mean, who hasn't been leaving Walmart with armloads of stuff and you hip check that automatic door button? I do it all the time. Until recently, we lived in the Back Bay of Boston. We live about 5 blocks from the Amtrak station. It's such a hassle to fly now. If I'm speaking in the Northeast, I generally take the train. I took the train down here yesterday. I generally take the train. Let's say I'm going to be in a 7 or 8 day speaking tour. My wife's coming with me. We've got 2 great big suitcases on wheelies. We're hustling the 5 blocks to the train station. I'm looking for the curb cuts. Curb cuts were a great idea. Just roll the luggage up the curb cuts. We had our first grandbaby a little while ago, and the kids live here in Brooklyn. And we came down and stayed with them so they could get back to work. And I'd be walking the baby in the stroller, and I'm looking for the curb cuts. Curb cuts were a great idea. They were designed for people with handicaps, but I use them all the time. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico a while ago, and I was watching television. I wanted to watch the Red Sox game. It wasn't on TV in my room, but there was a sports bar downstairs. I figured it might be down there. I got on. There's 12 television sets. The third television set has the Red Sox game on, so I stationed myself in front of that TV to watch the game. But it was Albuquerque. Everybody's talking. Nobody cared about the game. So I said to the person behind the bar, could you do me a favor and put that third TV on closed captioning? And I watched the whole game in closed captioning. The government estimated last year that 90% of people who use closed captioning do not have hearing losses. It's in airports and fitness centers and restaurants where they can scroll a closed caption without having the volume up. In other words, they made all these changes for people with handicaps only to realize that this stuff helps everybody. And that's what universal design says. Universal design says rather than standing the whole class on its head for this one special needs kid, just teach in this specific way that reaches a special needs kid, but it's helpful for everybody. On my website, I've got the top 10 rules for universal design teaching. One of them is a great way to teach special needs kids. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. Begin the class with something begin the class telling them this is what we're going to do today. Then do it, and then summarize it at the end. That's a great way to teach special needs kids. I would submit it's a great way to teach. So if you teach that way, you're not only helping the special needs kid, you're helping all kids. One of the things in this thing that we do is training teachers to do this very, very simple thing. This very simple thing. When you give directions, you've got some kids that learn visually, some kids that learn auditorily. So when you give directions, you say, I want you to do pages 113 to 115. saying it and writing it at the same time. Saying it for the kids who learn through their ears, writing it for the kids who learn through their eyes. If you're a visual teacher, you tend to write everything down without saying it. If you're an auditory teacher, you tend to say it without writing it down. You got to train yourself to do both. It's just simple strategies like that through universal design that make things work for all kids. And I call it shoveling off the ramp. And I tell an old New England story from a friend of mine at the University of Vermont. If you can picture the scene, it's 7:30 in the morning at a New England elementary school, and there's 300 kids in the parking lot waiting to get into school. But there'd been a surprise snowstorm that morning, and the steps were all covered with ice and snow, and the kids can't get up the steps. So the janitor's out shoveling off the steps to let the kids in. And among the children who are waiting is the little boy in a wheelchair. And he says, sir, he says to the janitor, excuse me, sir, could you please shovel off the wheelchair ramp so I can get in? Will you please shovel off the wheelchair ramp so I can get in? And the janitor gets a little bit miffed. He says, look, take it easy. There's 400 of them. There's only one of you. Let me shovel off the steps so that they get in. So let me shovel off the steps and let them in. Then I'll shovel off the ramp and let you in, but you'll have to wait. And the kid says, but if you shovel off the ramp, we can all get in. In other words, if you make this place accessible to me, you've made it accessible to everybody. And that's what universal design says. If you teach using these basic principles that we're going to be talking about, not only will it be helpful for the child who struggles in your class, it'll be helpful for everybody. It's just a good way to teach. It's a good, solid way to teach. I want to keep close to time. And what time we'll be taking a break soon. But I did want to send out a special greeting to a group of folks out there. Raise your hand if you are a special education teacher. Yeah, you bet. You bet. Yeah, you bet. You bet. The problem with special ed is that nobody understands special ed. Those of you in special ed, please finish the sentence for me, if you will. You go to a family wedding. You're at a family wedding. You bump into your Aunt Ruth. You haven't seen Aunt Ruth in a while. And Aunt Ruth daughters up to you and says, hi, honey, how are you? And you say, I'm fine, Aunt Ruth, how are you? And so, well, I'm okay, little and big on my shoulder, but I'm all right. And said, I'm sorry, honey, which one are you? And you say, I'm Sally, I'm Maureen's daughter. Oh, yes, Sally. And what do you do for a living, honey? And you say, I'm an educator. She says, oh, you're a school teacher, isn't that sweet? And what grade do you teach? And you say, well, I don't teach in a grade. I'm in special ed. I deal with handicapped kids. And Aunt Ruth says, finish the sentence for me, please. Aunt Ruth says, oh, you must have so much patience. Don't you hate it? See, the implication being you don't have to be real smart to be in special ed, you know. Just a little smarter than the kids is all it takes. But you need to be patient. For those of you who aren't in special ed, let's get rid of that right now. Special ed has got nothing to do with patience. In fact, I don't even like the phrase special ed because it implies I'm special and you're not, or my kids are special and your kids aren't. I don't even like the phrase special ed. But if there's one difference between special ed and regular ed, it's probably this. There's one difference between special ed and regular ed, it's probably this. I often hear my colleagues and friends and brothers and sisters in regular education say this. Oh, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. He's doing it for attention. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. You know what we're trained to understand in special ed? The squeaky wheel needs the grease. That's why it's squeaking. If you don't put some grease on it, it's going to fall off the bloody wagon or bring the wagon to a screeching halt. I think the ugliest phrase we use in education today is this one, attention-seeking behavior. He's doing it for attention. Well, then give him some. How often does a kid tell us what he needs? And listen to what we say. The kid's doing it for attention, so I what? Ignored him. Duh. The kid is telling you what he needed, you gave him the opposite. That would be like me saying to Abe, I'm really thirsty, and he responds by giving me a bag of pretzels. I said, I told you what I needed, you gave me the opposite. You can ignore the behavior, but you can't ignore the need. And what we're going to focus on is what I think the big change we need to make in educating kids in the 21st century. We've forgotten everything we know about development. We've forgotten the kids develop. What I said, he did it because he's 5. We've forgotten everything we know about development. We've forgotten everything we know about what it's like to be a child. But see, here's the real danger that we face. And it really does bring us here together today. You know Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist, probably the greatest anthropologist to ever walk the planet? Shortly before she died, she said this. She said, we, the people in this room, we are the first generation in the history of mankind who cannot say this to their children. Every generation before us has been able to say this to their children. You're a child. I'm an adult. I was a child once. I know what it's like. I can guide you through childhood. We can't say that. We can't say that. I have no idea what it's like to be a kid today. And most of you don't either. It is so different. I'm not saying better or worse, but there are pleasures and there are pressures on kids today that were unheard of a generation ago. We don't know what it's like to be a kid. When I was a kid, if I wanted to spoil somebody's reputation, I'd get in the school bus and whisper a rumor and hope that it got around. Now, a kid wants to spoil another kid's reputation, she can get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, send out an anonymous email blast to 300 other kids spoiling that child's reputation, and no one will even know who sent it. Kids are living with very, very, very different pressures and different pleasures now. And we need to get down on our knees and look at the world through their eyes, because we're making such desperate mistakes with kids this generation, and it frightens me. The kids that are in this community today are facing pressures that we couldn't have dreamed of a generation ago. And it brings me, as we wrap up for the morning session, it brings me to a pet peeve that I have, and I don't know if anybody else shares this, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but I think it's indicative of the problems we're facing raising children in the 21st century. I travel for a living, and oftentimes when I come into a new town, last thing I'll do before I go to bed is watch the 11 o'clock local news. Because maybe there's something going on in town that's a hot issue that I could work into my presentation and, say something that, means something to the local folks in town. And I swear, half the time when I turn on the TV, they end the broadcast like this. They have the anchor person come on and she say, get your tissues ready, get your Kleenex ready, because we're going to show you a piece of film after this commercial that's going to make you, it's so beautiful and it's so wonderful. And I say, okay, here it comes. And sure enough, it comes on and it shows a member of our military returning home from being deployed and surprising their kids at a basketball game or at a baseball game or at an assembly. Coming home, not telling the kids that we're coming home, but walking in and surprising their kids in front of everybody. There was one on the other day that I saw, and it was a little boy, 9 years old. His father had been deployed for 18 months. That's 20% of this kid's life. Hadn't seen his dad in a year and a half. And he's a little league ball player. And they cooked this whole thing up, and they said to the kids, when we have our game tomorrow, there's going to be a lot of press. There's going to be a lot of cameras and stuff here because they're doing a documentary on Little League Baseball. So when you come tomorrow to the game, don't be surprised to see a lot of cameras and stuff here. So all the kids come. This 9-year-old boy who hasn't seen his dad in a year and a half gets up to bat. The umpire's behind the pitcher, the umpire with a mask on. First pitch, way outside, the umpire says, strike one. Kid says, it's kind of weird, it wasn't a strike. Second pitch, way outside, strike two, the umpire says. Third pitch, way outside, the umpire says, strike three. The kid looks at the umpire takes off his mask, and it's his dad. Kid falls to his knees, gets halfway to the mound and falls to his knees sobbing. The dad comes, picks him up, carries him off, everybody cheering. I ask you this question. Whose needs were met there? Yeah. That weren't the kid's needs. This kid hadn't seen his dad in 18 months. How should that have been? Dad's coming home on Tuesday. Why don't you take the car out and watch it? You know how he loves having the car clean. And let's make a reservation at his famous pizza place, and as soon as he gets here, we'll go and we'll have Gino make his favorite pizza. That's the way it should have been done. He should have been part of it. He didn't need to fall to his knees and sob in front of his friends on a regional TV. Because we forget the way kids develop, we keep making these mistakes. We make decisions that are really based on what's good for us, that meets our needs, not the needs of the kids. That's not the way a 9-year-old should have seen his father after 18 months. We need to take a real careful look at what we're doing with this generation of kids. Because if we put this pressure on kids, it's beginning more and more and more to things begin to fall apart for these kids, and they fall into the deep hole that Malky fell into. When I watched those films and I thought of that, I was reminded of, and we'll wrap up with this, we'll take a break after this, but I was reminded of, I was interviewed on National Public Radio a couple of months ago. And it's nerve-wracking being interviewed on National Public Radio. I mean, it's national news. I mean, it's, 17-minute live interviews. I do a lot of radio interviews. I did one the other night, but they're commercial radio. So you can say to the person who's doing the interview, can you, when the commercial's on, you say, look, would you ask me this? You can kind of manipulate the interview. NPR, 17 minutes live. And it's really nerve-wracking. I mean, the guy who's doing the interview is smarter than you. I mean, that's a given. It's NPR, right? And so it really, I'm nervous about the interview. 17-minute interview live all over the country. The first 16 minutes go great. Terrific. There's 1 minute left, and the interviewer says, well, Dr. Lavoie, we got about 40 seconds left. If you could tell the American people one thing about children, what would that be? Kind of a tough question with no preparation. But what I said was something for one of the books, and I think it was timely. And think of Malky when you think of this and the other Malkys. We need to come to the profound understanding that kids go to school for a living. It's their job. They do it 6 hours a day. Not only is their job, very candidly, not only is their job in communities like this, it's their entire identity. Think about it. You're walking through your neighborhood here. You see an 11-year-old kid you haven't seen for a while. You go up to him, you go up to him and say, hi, Billy, what? What's the first thing you say to him? How's school? Now, you might be with his dad for an hour before you think to ask his dad how things are at work. In our culture, we don't identify adults with what they do for a living, but we very clearly identify kids with what they do for a living. Hi, Johnny, how's school? We need to come to recognize that when a child is failing and struggling in school, it impacts his entire identity. It impacts the way he feels about his mom and dad. It impacts the way he feels about life. It impacts the way he feels about himself. The reality is that when a child is failing in school in this culture, it impacts the child's entire identity. It shouldn't surprise us. It shouldn't surprise us that they begin to fall apart. Malky described herself as fragile before she was broken. You've got fragile kids. We can save those kids. We can save those kids. And some of the strategies we're going to talk about as the day goes on will answer that. Okay, I'm being told this, and let me just very quickly, nobody asked me to say this, but I will say it on my own. Abe sent me a copy of this book. I read voraciously. I've read everything that's out there. He sent me this book. I live in a little town in Cape Cod. I picked it up at the post office. I made the mistake of opening it, sitting in the car. I sat in a running car for 20 minutes. I couldn't put it down. It's got amazing, amazing material. I've never really quite seen anything like it. For years, I recommended this book called Unconventional Wisdom by Reuven Elkins, a rabbi that's an expert. And what he talks in here is Torah perspectives on special ed. Actually, rationale in the Torah for why we should be only special ed kids. This is the one I'm going to recommend from now on. It's extraordinary, and it is available here. It's called Spare the Child.